Hello, my name is Ted Knutson. I'm CEO of StatsBomb. Today, I'm going to talk and do my presentation from the FC Barcelona Coach Analytics Summit. I was lucky enough to be invited to present there in November of 2018, and a lot of people asked for my slides. So I figured this was a pretty good way to kind of give the talk again and let people who weren't there have a chance to at least see what I said. It's pretty amazing to be invited to this type of thing. Like StatsBomb started from zero in 2013, and to be invited to present to Barcelona and give a talk on football analytics, but also alongside like these incredible luminaries who like totally respect in the football world who are doing this as a job, like Sarah Rudd at Arsenal and Will Spearman at Liverpool, Ravi Ramaneni at Seattle, Javi Fernandez at Barcelona, and then Luke Bourne and Dean Oliver of the NBA world. It's it's a huge compliment to the work that's going on at StatsBomb, to all the people that have worked with me and taught me more. Um, it's it's hard to describe. It's just a really cool feeling to be there. So with these type of talks, I've given actually a talk almost every month this year, which I think is kind of surprising. And most of them have been different, partly based on, hey, can you talk about this? And partly based on, keeping it interesting for myself. I think the most entertaining of them was probably the Radar Wars one that I gave at Cassis. The longest was certainly the lecture for the Barcelona Innovation Hub and Johan Cruyff Institute Master's Program. But this one was a big enough deal that I spent a couple months thinking about what I wanted to do with it and tried to make it the best of the lot. The topic that we had was to discuss how coaches might use data inside of games to help them make adjustments and to help improve the team. So there's part of that in here. Another part of it, I was trying to figure out how to kind of give a structure to that and tie it all together. And so it's a bit of a journey involved here, but it ended up being called Game Models and the Full Data Stack. You guys will be able to judge whether or not you think it's any good, but thanks, and here goes. Let's talk about coaches. You can't kill them as much as you might want to sometimes, especially if you have a contentious relationship or if they're just that type of guy. But the fact of the matter is, like, these guys are under enormous pressure, and so sometimes it can be very challenging. You're one of many people inside of a football club who might need their attention. And if you look at these guys, Pep Guardiola is probably the world's greatest football coach, at least in the modern generation. You've got Ernesto Valverde, who had an amazing season with Barcelona last year. Julian Nagelsmann, who is one of the best young coaches in Germany and looks like he has a huge, bright future ahead of him. All these guys play football in different styles, and they've got different needs. They communicate, at least partly in different languages. One's in England, one's in Spain, one's in Germany. They might all be able to speak English, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's natural for them. Nevertheless, they are basically the most important person inside of your club at any one point. So with these guys in mind, from a recruitment perspective, you need to provide the best list of candidates that fit the coach's tactical style while still fitting the budgetary needs of your club. Now, this is true if you're at Barcelona, or it's true if you go down into like English League One. But the job doesn't change. Like the only thing that changes around that job really is the constraints about it. In order to do this, in order to provide the best list of candidates, you need to pull information from your coaches, but that can be difficult. Different phrases mean different things, especially across languages. I found it amazing that even numbers meant different things inside of football, which as a mathematician isn't supposed to be true. It's not the universal language of numbers. A six doesn't in one system doesn't necessarily mean a six in another system. So that was a weird thing to come across. Another thing to be aware of is like some coaches speak in a lot of cliches, which actually makes it quite useful for them in the media because they can say things and give sound bites that don't necessarily give any insight. But it makes it difficult for you to understand what they need. And the fact of the matter is you must understand them in order to do your job. You need to pull information from these guys or girls in women's football in order to find the best candidates, to find players that they want in the next transfer window or future transfer windows or whatever. So how do you talk football but in a way that's meaningful to you and a way that coaches are comfortable? Inside of Brentford and Midtjylland, one way that we did this was with Archetypes. For this role, can you tell me some of the players around the world that you think are the best fit? It doesn't have to be ones that you've worked with or this league, but if you had to take your ideal players for these particular spots and positions in your team, who would they be? Like, tell me some, from the last 5-10 years, a little bit of historic information. And the reason why is because you want to profile what they do. Like, give me an idea. Um, okay, now what do you love about those players? What makes them special or especially suited to this position in your system? These are the types of questions you ask to get them to peel back some layers and give you information. And while they're giving you these answers, you can translate that information to basically football data proofs. So if a coach says that, I need them to press aggressively, maybe you're thinking, well, all right, so we're gonna look at pressures and pressure regains and tackles in the data to try and find those types of players. Or he needs to create for his teammates. So now you're looking at deep progressions, maybe some open play XG assisted, or as some people call it, expected assists. Or maybe, like you add some set piece delivery into that, especially from the left side. It's a nice bonus to improve your set piece delivery as part of this process. You must dribble through midfield. So now you've got like a slightly different tilt on the data, saying that we need a locational dribbling profile. It's all doable, and in some cases it's all quite straightforward. But what you're doing is you're taking these ideas of football and then turning them into player skill sets and profiles. Another way that archetypes help us is in similarity scores. So say you're at Napoli and you know that you're losing Jorginho. Couldn't keep him, love him, but your coach is like, this is the most important player in my system. I have to have a guy exactly like him or as close as we can have. So you use the similarity scores and assume that this is like the stuff that you care about. You might care about different stuff, so you use a different similarity profile. But say that these are all the things that we want this player to do. So like we go into the data set with the similarity scores. Who looks like this player? Who looks like Jorginho? One guy here is Frankie de Jong, who everybody has been tracking down, and he's one of the hottest young names in world football as a midfielder. But another one in there is Toyn Koopmeiners, who, I haven't seen this guy play. He's not on any of our lists, but at least he's intriguing. So now suddenly you're scouting guys that you haven't looked at. Maxime Lopez is on that list, and you look at him and you're like, all right, he's a little less defensively output than Jorginho, but he looks like he's pretty good on the attacking side. So there's a balance inside of that. And then you've got Rodrigo Bentancur, who's really good, looked really good coming out of Argentina, has slotted in almost perfectly as a young midfielder in the Juve system. And maybe he doesn't quite have as much of the attack at the moment, but again, given the age profiles and everything there, maybe he does. We'll look at it more and we'll scout him more, but at least this builds us a list of players that can fit into that. So all of this communication type stuff comes back around to a more important, broader theme, which is a game model. How do these players fit my system? Well, what is the system? And the definition of a game model looks like both general guidelines and specific instructions for what players should be doing on the pitch. Now, it's most likely to focus on the four phases, so what happens in possession, out of possession, and transitions between the two. But it goes deeper and more specific to being able to discuss what players need to be doing in any location and situation. Now, when you think about that, that's kind of a lot. That's like it's a lot of specific stuff. And in many cases, your coaches might not have thought about it in that type of detail or be able to sort of put that information into a structured format that we're discussing right here. Maybe they don't think about it in that way. Maybe when they look at it, they know how to train the players and they kind of can see on the pitch what's wrong and do interventions, but maybe they can't regurgitate the information in a way that you need. But like you need your coaches to tell you in detail what the team is supposed to do at almost every point on the pitch. incentives may be required here. You might need to go to your director of football or your owner and discuss with them like why you need this, why, and really you have to obviously explain to the coach why you need this. You need time though. Communication can be difficult, but they will talk. Oh yes. You might have to strap them into a chair like James Bond and gradually interrogate them until you get all the information that you need. But this type of stuff actually makes their lives better. To be totally honest with you, if you get it right, you can dramatically improve the information that you give them so that they can have better info to adjust the team, to do opposition scouting, to see where things are breaking down. So let's talk a little bit about specific models. So this is a defensive side model. And at StatsBomb on StatsBomb IQ, we produce these things called defensive activity maps. On the left-hand side here, this is Stoke City from last year, and these are used to kind of look at where teams are defending, especially compared to league average. So the attacking goes left to right, and in this particular map, you can see Stoke is like pretty heavy above league average in their own area and in their own half of the pitch, and not nearly that much going on in the opposition half of the pitch. Whereas Manchester City is like a huge counterpoint to this. Manchester City's whole game is predicated on keeping teams penned into their own end and making sure that it's difficult to get out and keep them there until they can score. Uh, these give you an idea of how they're defending. They're not perfect, but if you're looking for places to start, these are pretty useful. Now, when we dig down into the specifics, we can start to take examples and figure out how do we analyze it in the next more detailed way. So when the opponent moves the ball into zone X, we need to do Y, right? And this can happen anywhere and all over the pitch. But for an example, here's in a middle block. So if we're defending in a middle block, when the ball moves into the central zones on our side of the halfway line, we need to pressure a player directly within 1 second. So we don't mind if they've got the ball on their own side of the pitch. Maybe we've got a little bit of a pressing trigger over here on the wide areas just before they enter. Maybe they push it centrally, push it backwards. And then if it enters our area, we want to definitely push the ball wide, so we need to pressure immediately. And then you can use the data to figure out where the breakdowns are coming from. So, in this case, we had some failures when the ball got into the central area of the pitch. And then you take that information, you say, okay, when it failed, who was out of position? Like, who should be making that pressure? Why were they out of position, or why didn't they make that pressure? And then you follow up and give feedback. This is just ways to provide information for coaches to then make small adjustments. The funny thing is it varies on a team by team and coach by coach basis. So this is where you have to have the game model. Pep's defensive structure is not the same as Tony Pulis's defensive structure. It's not the same as Valverde's. It's probably not the same as Nagelsmann. And even from like game to game, Nagelsmann's might not be the same. It might differ. But if you've got this information, you're able to tighten the loop and hopefully save them a lot more time as to what's happening on the pitch. You don't have to watch as much video. You could just say, all right, pop, oh yeah, here's these 3 clips. We need to talk a little bit about that, and hopefully we can improve in the second half. Attacking models are a little more tricky. Often, when it comes to attacking, coaches talk about free form. When we get the ball, we know how to get the ball in the final third. We've got a lot of structure there. But once we get there, then we need players to be a little more innovative. But once again, we're kind of asking, what should a player look for when they have the ball at point A, point B, point C? Like different areas on the pitch, what should they be looking for to do? And then not only do they have that, when we progress the ball into these zones, what needs to happen for us to be successful? So you're saying, what should happen? And then how do we define success? And once again, success will differ by coach. So, when the ball gets out wide, some coaches are going to want their wide forwards or wingers to cross the ball in. And if they're successfully crossing it into good areas, that's okay. Whereas other coaches, if you're crossing it, like that's a big problem. So again, it comes on a coach by coach basis. We're kind of defining what is successful, and you need to have that type of information. This particular graphic, this chart is done by E.T. McKinley. The Analysis Evolved guys have been doing really impressive work over the last year, I think, especially. In StatsBomb, we use it slightly differently. We kind of look at it from a particular zone, what is happening, and we profile it in that way. But it gives you, this type of visualization gives you a couple different perspectives on what you could do with it, and how you might find it useful. And then you come back to like, okay, what happens? What actually happened on the pitch? Was that successful or not? And you kind of use your own baselines as to whether or not things are going right, or can we tell? So in this one, it looks like Will Trapp didn't pass the ball that forward. He's making a lot of wide passes, but Arthur, when he got the ball, did pass forward. Now I don't know if this is a zonal information or not, but you can come back to that and say, hey, in this particular location, when we get the ball, we need to be passing the ball forward X% of the time. We need to be progressive in this way. And if we do, then our game model says that we should succeed. And if we're not, then we can talk to those players and say, hey, this didn't happen in the first half. Why didn't it happen in this half? How do we do better in the second half? We also use passing networks to kind of look at different structure from half to half. And in particular with the StatsBomb ones, we layer in color based on XG chain. So when this player was part of the passing of a possession, did it end up in a successful attack or shot? We also kind of look at changes in team shape. So in this one, you look over here, there's not as much progression on the left-hand side and the attacking side. You look over the second half, you see a lot more red. You also see Aubameyang kind of occupying this spot fairly high up. Ozil has shifted over. We see more Ozil on the right-hand side. Lacazette's moved up in central, and Arsenal created a lot more in that half. Arsenal's habit this year has been to have a slow first half and then a much more attacking second half where they pull away. And they've been successful with it. Don't know if that's a good long-term strategy, but it certainly worked for them so far. And this is the type of thing where, again, we made halftime adjustments. Did those adjustments take? Were we successful with them? Attacking model breakdowns and AUPs. So AUPs are actions under pressure. They're the attacking side of what happens when a player is pressed. So say we've got the ball and the player is moving forward, which is what we would call a carry from a data perspective. And then someone comes and presses him. So suddenly that carry is under pressure. And he doesn't actually dribble it, but maybe he releases it for a pass. And that pass is also under pressure. And AUPs are like hugely important because we know that player behavior changes under pressure. And if you can start to profile like how that happens, maybe you can start to profile and figure out which players you want to pick on a little more, but also like what might happen if we apply pressure here or here, and how do we change the shape of game via doing that. So from attacking model breakdown, how often are we able to get the ball into X zone? Say we've got 100 possessions a game. It's just a made up number, but how often are we able, as part of our possession model, to get it into zone X, Y, Z? And then if we struggle to get the ball into a specific zone, where's the breakdown occurring? Again, the needs will change from coach to coach. Some will get to their spots with direct play, others with a patient possession game. Thus, the definition of success changes. We can also drill this down to the player level. So, we're getting to the specific zones, but how does it look when this player gets the ball? And then where are our players struggling to play under pressure? How are they struggling? Like, are they failing specific passes or dribbles? And then we can use the tools potentially if you're looking at the future. If we're struggling regularly in these places and these players are the ones that are breaking down our game model, can we find players that do that better? So this is a really simple dumb viz, and we've spoofed the numbers here. They're not real numbers, but to give you an idea, like say you're looking at halftime and you want to know in this zone whose possession broke down. So you bring in the data and you look at it and you're like, all right, these were the passes that failed, and these were the passes that failed under no pressure, which might be a pretty big deal. These are the pressured passes that failed. These are the dribbles failed. These are the lost headers failed. So you can profile not only like whose possession is breaking down, but in what ways is it breaking down? And again, you're just kind of looking for different different types of data slices and information to provide that helps the coach make adjustments into the half, or for the next game or whatever. And then alongside of that, you can actually go and say, this is our attacking model. We felt that this player had a lot of issues in the first half. How did he lose the ball? And can we make adjustments to help out in the second half so that we just control the game better? Now, another way that you can actually start to look at and profile your attacking model is via attacking sets. In basketball, we kind of call them plays. Some call them set plays. This one is a fun one because it's like an elevator screen or an elevator pick. If you watch what happens, you'll see the player from the baseline come up, and he goes right between these two guys, and then they both set picks so that they keep the man off, and then he can't get to it fast enough to close out the shot. But the idea is that the ball starts in this location, and then you've got a couple of options from this location in order to try and create a mismatch or an open shot or whatever. Now, football doesn't seem to have many of these, but it could. And it seems like this is actually a fairly interesting and useful way to run your attack once you get set up in the final third. It doesn't have to be as explicit as this, but I don't know. I look at it and I don't have any arrogance about this particular sport. I think that, we look at many of the great coaches around the world, and they talk about, Pep talks about learning from a water polo coach, or some of the great Germans talk about learning more about pressing and defensive zonal coverage from talking to coaches of field hockey. So the game principles certainly apply, and I think a lot of the data principles certainly apply too. This one, I think, in football, we could start to see more of this if you add the right structure to it. So again, we've got the ball in the same location. It's over here on the wing. They're going to run the exact same sort of elevator screen here. The pick happens, but the ball goes down low. So you've got a couple of different options inside of the same framework. And then each time you can look at that and you can analyze whether that's happening. Now, some people think that this shouldn't or doesn't happen in football. I found this example from my own work back in 2013 on Manchester City. And you kind of have Yaya playing the point guard role here. And this season it was often Yaya or David Silva. And then if you look down low, Sergio Aguero, who's incredibly strong lower body, sort of does a little post up. Rio pushes him out of it. But Yaya's first look is down into Aguero. He doesn't see anything, shifts it back over this way. You've got Nasri making a dummy run and then decoys back up to try and suck the center back in. And then Vidic recovers just in time after Negredo makes this little run here. And there's a lot of moving parts in this, and it's a little more dynamic than the basketball sets. That's fine, but you could do things like this. Another way that City used to do this is if they get the post up, you'd see a fullback make the overlapping run, and then you would see an inside run again like this, so that they could potentially have multiple passing options if Aguero couldn't turn the ball out, to create plus EV attacks. So if you have reusable attacking sets, you can use the data to analyze whether you're successful executing out of different sets. If you don't have set plays, you can still identify how successful you are executing from different positions on the pitch. So you don't have to be as specific as this, but when the ball gets to this area of the pitch, what do we do with it? Are we successful with it? Are we not? And then you can also identify where players are making like the same reads. So if the player makes the same pass every single time from a certain spot, that's pretty easy to defend. And actually, you can invert that to say when the opposition gets the ball in this spot, if they're always making the same pass, then you can overload that, you can overplay that to try and get the ball back easier, and it becomes easier for your own team to defend. We're going to move forward a little bit to the phases of data innovation inside a sport. It's a big phrase. But we've seen enough sports do this now where the data revolution happens, and it happens in pretty much the same time sequence. So phase one is almost always recruitment. We've got this data, and how do we find better players for lower prices? Like, this is classic Moneyball type stuff. And it makes sense because players represent the biggest cost center and are the biggest assets inside of a club. How do we find better players is a big question. How do we pay less for the same player, the equivalent player? Then you move on to phase two, which is largely tactical. So how do we create more effective styles of play. If you look at basketball, you've got the 3-point and the dribble drive kind of era that we're in right now. And it gradually crept up, and a lot of the best teams that had this information early on didn't speak about it. So like we don't know exactly when it happened, but you definitely have seen basketball change massively over time. And how do we find coaches that actually execute those styles? And finally, how do we find and use data to profile opponents and exploit weaknesses, or to find our own weaknesses and figure out like how do we again adjust our game to improve what we're doing, to improve our execution? Then phase 3 is usually player development. So baseball has been really strongly involved in this over the last couple of years. This happens when the market has become relatively efficient at pricing players. So the focus then turns internally and kind of asks, how do we create better players? Now, in a way, this happens in football right now, right? Like the academies are asking this question. But also you have like, how do we find good players with fixable weaknesses for discounts, so for cheaper prices, and make them better? Now, one of the interesting things about this is phase 2 and phase 3 are often the exclusive realm of coaches right now. Coaches are the only ones that get to do this type of stuff. Style of play, that's coach. Player development, that's coach. But what we know from these other sports is that it's not coach. Like it's coach analyst. It's quantitative stuff that does all the number crunching, that figures out the best style to play, and then you need coaches to be able to execute it. You have to find those coaches. How do we profile those coaches, or how do we teach them better so that they can do what we need them to do? And then the player development side is truly coaching. But what we saw in baseball is the velocity revolution in baseball for pitchers first. So how do we create guys that can throw harder, because that is highly correlated with getting outs? Or how do we find players that hit the ball harder, and how do we adjust their exit velocities and their bat trajectories so that we can make sure that when they do hit the ball, which is hard, they hit the ball in a way that is more likely to get extra base hits and home runs. These things took high-tech cameras. They took specific types of programs to build these players with a lot of science involved. And that's not necessarily something that the current coaches of football are capable of doing, or would be involved in. It took a lot of development towards this idea that we need to be more quantitative. We need to find coaches that are open to technology and open to data and open to what we want to teach them to be able to move this game forward. And teams that did that ended up being much more successful than the teams that did not. These sports generally are not as constrained, or they are more constrained on a budgetary perspective. They don't have the gulfs in sort of income that football does. But that's not entirely true. Like the Oakland A's were the Minnows and the Yankees were the Giants. And, Oakland had a lot of success because they were able to overcome this because they invested in these types of ideas first. The Yankees eventually copied them alongside the Dodgers and have some of the biggest analytics groups in the sport now. But, they needed to make sure that Oakland didn't stay that far ahead of them. So when talking about the innovation stuff, like we also care about what do your data stack look like. For match data, for bigger clubs especially, it's fairly typical to have video, and especially like the wide angle video. Sure, that's straightforward. Tracking, that's wearables. Yeah, okay, we've all got the sort of wearable bras that players wear on the pitch. Optical tracking, you may or may not have, and you may or may not have access to that of your opponents. So that's like a question. You need to, in many cases, to have like the best information. And then event data. So pretty much all of them have event data, and that's it's straightforward at this point. Not everybody uses event data in the same way. Not everybody's able to sort of deliver the event data to the coaches that care about it, but it does exist, and in total terms, it's actually quite cheap. But then we move over to the training data side and maybe the academy side as well. And you've probably got video of your training, and you've probably got wearables. Most of that tracking wearables information is going to go to the sports scientists and not necessarily the sort of data analyst quants. But do you have optical tracking? Like, do you have that type of information coming out of your training? And do you have event data? Probably not. Like, very few clubs that I'm aware of have this type of information at the training level. And it matters because football is inherently a low sample size sport for most things that we care about. So, for a single player, you might average 3 shots a game. And over the course of the season, 30 games, that's actually a pretty high volume of shots for most players. It's tough to get full profiles on them. And it's not just about shots, it's about how even they defend in certain systems or certain ways. And we'll talk more about this in a minute. But the tracking data stuff, so tracking offers a whole new level of insight in how your team is performing within your game model. And if you have training data, then your sample size gets pretty large. Now, you probably need to be very explicit about what is valid data and what is not. And if you heard Luke's talk, he talked about they have 2.5 million shots or something in their training center over the course of a year. They're able to have that level of information, which is kind of an amazing number. But there's this point in the talk where he's talking about their best players can shoot like 90 to 95% from three-point range. But in a game situation, that even their best shooters are going to look at like 40 or 45% when they're defended. So like it's not all the same level of information. It's not all the same level of validity. You have to be careful about choosing which things you think matter, which things do not. In other sports, the theorizing was previously left solely up to the coaches, but now we can use tracking data to help find strategic edges systematically. Now, if you look at this plot, it's an overhead view of basic tracking data. You've got the information of all the players on the pitch. You've got some information about shape and space that they occupy. And you might not have tracking data in training, but if you look over here, this is drone footage, and drone footage is happening more and more. Coaches kind of love this because they see this from above. It doesn't look almost any different than what the tracking data does. And if coaches want this type of information, we can convey it to them much more easily via the event data. You don't have to worry about the wind. You don't have to worry about if your drones and your stadia or your training area exist in a flight path, so you can't actually use them. But you can get this type of info, and you can use it in interesting ways. And if you have the game model, then you can start to say, oh yeah, this player was out of shape in these positions during these situations, and maybe we want to review it with them on the video to talk them through it. More reasons why you care about the data stack. Like, we need to better profile player skills. Player skill is a big deal for us, and general aggregate player skills from game to game we do okay with in event data, but even so, like some things you get to drill down and you can't answer it with in-game data. So in these cases, we really want to increase sample size. Like, who are the good long-range shooters on your team? How do you know? And the fact of the matter is, from game data over the course of a season, you probably don't. It's very hard to figure out that info. There's a lot of variance in long-range shots. There's a lot of information you may or may not have. So if Cristiano Ronaldo shoots 6 to 7 times a game, we can profile his finishing pretty well over the course of a season. But 6 to 7 times a game is probably twice that of the 95th percentile striker in terms of shot volume. So if we can do it with Cristiano, and we're talking about forwards here, how long is it going to take us to profile a midfielder? And then you say, all right, not only just a midfielder's shots, but how long is it going to take us to profile their long-range shots? So here's Coutinho, and this is a pretty good example. Last year, so it's basically half a season, Coutinho has 31 shots, 5 goals. Expected goals are like 1.52. That's good. That's really good. But is it sustainable? Like, can he continue to do that? And if you look early in his career, Coutinho seemed to be basically an average finisher from distance. These plots are built on StatsBomb IQ, and we actually have them set so that we only see shots from 15 yards or further out. So maybe we look at Coutinho over the course of 3 seasons. So now we bumped up his total shot volume to 226 shots. And if we look at it again just from 15 yards out or longer, you get 19 goals. The expected goals are 11.04. So he's not 3 times better than expected goals. He's like a little less than twice better than expected goals. But this is also pretty good. In addition to this, though, like we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, it looks like 5 direct free kicks here. So if we take those direct free kick goals out, which are a slightly different skill set, now we're looking at he's got 14 goals from range. And that becomes the area where like I kind of have a lean, but I'm not sure about it. Maybe you filter it down to information that's just shots on target, and now you're looking at only 64 shots on target. So is that normal for that type of player from that distance? I don't know. Like, these are all things that you want to profile, but it becomes a much easier question to answer if you have the information from the training. If you have training data, like say only from 11v11 sessions, maybe you do 90 extra minutes of those a game, or sorry, a week, maybe even more than that, then you're able to pull out the information and start to build a lot better profile of what this player's skill set is. Another question that we can't answer in football is, do players have sweet spots? We just don't get enough shots from specific areas on the pitch to be able to define it like we do in basketball. So in basketball, if you look at Danny Green here, an old Kirk Goldsberry shot map from the Grantland days, rest in peace, Grantland. You see Danny Green's got like a 47% three-point conversion rate here, and then like another 47% over here. On the exact same distance and the exact same corner three, he only has 40%, which is still good, but not amazing. Over from here, and then he's like 36% out here. So he's clearly got two different sets of sweet spots. He's a corner specialist from that corner. These are hugely useful for basketball, but they're probably useful for football players too, if we know that. And so a direct game tactical way that we would use this is to say, against a deep block, we want to take occasional longer range shots. And the reason why is because we want to force them to come out and potentially block it. And then if they create space after we've done one or two of these, maybe we can create the passes in behind that space that they've just created so that we can create shots that are closer to goal. But the players that we want taking these longer range shots should be the ones that are good shooters. And how do you know if they're good shooters? And is this shooter good from this spot but not good from another spot? Okay, well then let's make sure that they get shots from the spots that they're best able to convert from. But how do you know which spots those are? Well, you need the training data, so you need the tracking information and potentially the event information from your training to build the sample size. It's not just about open play. This is such a classic question again. Who takes the free kicks in your squad? Why? Like, why do they take those? Who are your best free kick takers? How do you know? Are you doing the information data tracking? They don't take enough of these in games ever. Does it vary by angle? Do they have sweet spots? Does it vary by distance? So maybe one of your guys is more able to get it up and down over the wall from close by the box, where another one, longer distances, they're able to not only hit the target, but hit it with power. Or maybe with finesse, you've got guys that are able to swing the ball in at just the right speed and height that allows you to get on the end of them and make your set pieces execute a little better. And really, you've got two options to find this stuff out. You can data track all your valid in-game situations and evaluate that, and you can experiment. And maybe you want to do both, but you can sort of do experiments to say, throughout the course of the season, we're going to have each player who wants to be involved in free kick taking take a couple of shots from each of these different spots on the pitch, and then we're going to data track those, and we're going to put a leaderboard up to say that whoever is at the top of the leaderboard, these are the guys that get to take shots from those spots or free kicks from those spots when they're in the game. Same thing for corners. You can do all of this as part of like your basic data training and track this information. You can do it down through your academy too. Your academy kids love this. Like they love to have information that tells them whether they're improving, and you can have that type of stuff. And they also, they're competitive. They want to be part of this. They'd love to be able to take these kicks. And so if you do the work and you're good at them, then you can be on the board and you get to take them. Another area that I always find intriguing is like the goalkeeper stuff. And for us at StatsBomb, we've just released our goalkeeper module. We've done a lot of work. The reason why we've been able to do it now as opposed to before is we now have information about where the goalkeeper is on each and every shot, so we can better portion credit for it. We also know where the defenders are, so you can portion credit for that too. If you have a bunch of defenders in front of the shot, it's tougher to convert. And if your goalkeeper is like way out of the zone, like maybe you should take that into account. So there's a fun story that I've asked like a number of clubs that I've been around, and it's amazing. Every single one of them is giving me the same answer. How do you recruit your goalkeepers? Like if you need a new goalkeeper, how do you go about it? And almost universally, the story says, well, we ask our scouts for some goalkeepers that people think are pretty good. Maybe we have some coaches. They then ask around, or they take information from games they've seen. They feed it back to us. We probably do a little bit of oversight to make sure that these guys aren't truly terrible. And then we give it to our goalkeeper coach to look at. And like that happens every single place, which is really weird because that doesn't happen with outfield players nearly as much anymore. So like, you do a lot of work on outfield players and then you create the final lists and then you give it to your coach, but it's not nearly as dominant where like basically your goalkeeper is the recruitment analyst for any sort of goalkeeper. And it's incredible like how true this is. It's just a very old school way of doing this type of recruitment in football, when I think that that's changed actually quite a bit over the last 3, 4, 5 years. And the next question becomes, how do we train goalkeepers? What type of feedback do we provide them? Like, I'm not criticizing the goalkeeper coaches. I'm saying like, we don't know that much info, and maybe like goalkeeper coaches are going to be interested and involved in this. And that then goes down to another level that says, what info do you have on your backup goalkeepers? Like these guys very rarely play. Maybe they play in your cup matches, but like, what do they do well? What do they do poorly? How do you know? And then how do you know whether the skill set of the goalkeepers in your squad in the academy fit the game model you need them to execute? Because different game models have different goalkeeper skill sets that they require. Like if you have sort of a low block style that you're playing, or a middle block that wants a lot of crosses to come in, maybe you need a moderately active goalkeeper in cross collecting. And you need a pretty good shot stopper because they're going to face a lot of shots. But maybe if you're playing a high press, you need a goalkeeper that's more active in how they come after the ball and are a little more comfortable. Maybe they need fast reflexes, but they're comfortable with the ball at their feet. And maybe you need somebody that's really good at distribution and being able to pick guys out in positions up the pitch with precision. All of these are different types of profiles that you need. And are they being coached? Like, does the coaching fit your game model? I don't know, but it's something you certainly want to look at. With the right data stack, delivering feedback to goalkeepers on their training performance becomes fast and easy. So if you look at over here on the right with our visualization here, like this is where a shot's occurring, and then the actual goalkeeper position on this shot was right here, but the optimal goalkeeper position, according to quite a few shots from the model, says that it was right here. On any particular chance, the correct goalkeeper positioning is somewhere in the cone, but where exactly? Well, if you use data and models to build this type of information, you can then flag areas of weakness on a shot-by-shot basis, and you can give that right back to your goalkeepers. So you go from optical tracking data to the visualization to say that, oh yeah, these were like the 5 shots that you were most out of position on. Out of the whole sample of 100 shots that you had in training today, you were in position on, near the optimal position on these ones. The ones that we were out, let's review the video to find out why we were out of position and what happened there. It's not always the keeper's fault. Like plenty of times teams are intentionally pulling them across the goal in order to create more open chances. It's just something that you review to double check. Another thing you can do is, like this is a classic one that happens fairly regularly, is the keeper hugging their near post too tightly, or are they creating like the right amount of distance between covering the near post but not leaving the far post too open? And then over here you see kind of the density of deviation for 2 different goalkeepers. So one of them is Hugo Lloris and the other one's Petr Cech last year. And Petr Cech is like often sort of in and around a position, but like less sort of ideal in the central position as you might want. And it fits, some guys have a little bit of a lean too far to one side versus the other. Maybe they're right-handed versus left-handed, and they overcover a specific zone that they feel weak about, and you need to re-optimize that. But this type of goalkeeper feedback, I think actually kind of revolutionizes the coaching in the goalkeeper position, as long as you're able to provide it in a quick, straightforward, easy way that everyone can understand. So we've talked about all this stuff, and we're talking about player recruitment and coach information and pulling information from the coaches for that. But really that comes back to their game models. Like, what do we need the players to do? And to some extent, what do our current players do, and how can we confidently profile that? What do we need our players to do inside of the game model, whether it's from the coach that the game model is being dictated, or some clubs like the Red Bull organization kind of have a a more general game model that seems to be throughout their organization. So you're able to have that from different team to team. So like, what do we need the players to do versus what do they do right now? And how do we develop our players to build a more useful skill set for our game model? So it comes back to the full data stack type information. Like, do you have training info to help us develop the players faster and better? Can we do it at the academy level to make sure that the players that we're developing are the ones that are going to be the ones are useful long term to the team? And how do we find new players that fit our tactical game models? So once we go out into the world, how do we find guys that replicate this? How do we use data to do that, and also feed that information back to the scouts? And how do we take data and the game model and find out where we need to make adjustments during matches in places the opposition is finding weaknesses, or where the opposition is clearly struggling and we're able to just immediately profile that and say, we've had a lot of success in this area of the pitch, let's go after it, but also be aware that they might adjust. So like, what should we do if they make the adjustment? And these are all tactical situations, but you can use data to drill down and go faster. This is the essence of data-driven coaching and analysis. And in a lot of ways, it feels like this is kind of the missing position in football right now. Like, we don't have a lot of coach analysts. Robbie Ramaneni at Seattle talked to me a little bit at the conference that we were at about how much his job has changed over the last few years, and he has more understanding of this type of stuff, and he gets to have an impact. I don't think a lot of clubs have that, but I certainly think that we're moving toward that, and it's just this hugely valuable role. At one point, I talked to Billy Bean, and he said that the rarest thing that he's found in sport is this translator position, like somebody that can take the data and understand it from the people that are highly quantitative and have all these technical skills. And so you take their outputs and then you translate it back into game situations, or translate it down, the coaches and to the pitch, so that it's able to be executed. It's not just information that exists as like pie in the sky. It's information that comes to the important bits of your team and is able to make a difference. But you need the data to do it. And to some extent, you need the people willing to listen to it and open to communicating about it to be able to be successful. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this talk, and thanks again to Ewan and Derek for their help. My name is Ted Knutson. This is StatsBomb, and we'll see you soon.